online who can't understand Urdu? अगर है तो we can be bilingual. तो आदिल हर साल चूँकि छुट्टियां दिसंबर में पाकिस्तान आते हैं एंड ही इज़ वेरी काइंड एंड ग्रेशियस के अपने पर्सनल टाइम निकाल के वो डिलीवर्स अ टॉक एट SGPI और उसके दो फ़ायदे हमें होते हैं. एक SGPI को ये फ़ायदा होता है कि वी कैन इनकॉर्पोरेट मैनी ऑफ हिज थॉट्स इन अवर नेक्स्ट ईयर्स वर्क प्लान. और आदिल को एक टेस्टिंग ग्राउंड मिल जाती है टू टेस्ट हिज ओन आइडियाज ऑन अस so that he can refine his ideas. और उसी continuity को sorry उसी सिलसिले को continue रखने के लिए this year we are talking of yet another very exciting topic which is faith and climate change. और उसमें qualifier ये है in the age of adaptation. Those who attended his talk last year the talk was faith and climate change, and there was no mention of adaptation in it. So this year, when in the topic, when Adil WhatsApped me his proposed topic in the age of adaptation, so I became slightly curious, and I started defining adaptation from my own perspective के मेरे लिए adaptation क्या है. तो जो फौरी तौर पर मेरे जहन में आया कि अच्छा adaptation तो ये है learn to live with the climate change and learn to live with losses and relocate if you have to relocate somewhere to minimize your vulnerabilities. Try to somehow cope up with these vulnerabilities, be more resilient, etc. etc. तो फौरी तौर पे जो मेरा पहला ख्याल आया, मैंने कहा आदिल इस दफ़ा हमें कोई फर्टाइलिस्ट लेक्चर देने तो नहीं आ रहा कि अच्छा भाई मिटिगेशन तो जो है वो हो नहीं पाई, तो अडाप्टेशन जो है वो जो पाकिस्तान में कहते हैं ब्यूरोक्रेसी या अलाक्रेसी, तो अब आप फेथ की तरफ निकल जाओ और वो क्या मुफलिस अपने मुकद्दर से शिकायत ना करो, इससे इंसान के ईमान पे हर्फ आता है. तो मैंने कहा पता नहीं कोई इस तरह का लेक्चर शायद आज लेके देने जा रहे होंगे. लेकिन उसके बाद जो दूसरा सवाल मेरे जहन में आया वो ये था कि वाई ही क्वालिफाइड इट इन द एज ऑफ अडेप्टेशन, व्हाट अबाउट इन द एज ऑफ मिटिगेशन. वी हैवंट एंडेड मिटिगेशन येट. मिटिगेशन अपनी जगह पे कायम है. एंड व्हेन वी टॉक ऑफ मिटिगेशन वी are talking of science, we are talking of technologies, we are talking of emission reduction, projections, etc. So again, I'm sure Adil ने अपनी स्लाइड्स में इनको कुछ कवर किया होगा, लेकिन जो मेरे जहन में सेकंड क्वेश्चन प्रोबिंग क्वेश्चन है वो यही था कि इसको अडेप्टेशन तक महदूद रखा तो इसमें मिटिगेशन कहाँ पे गया. और तीसरा फिर मेरे जहन में ये चीज़ भी थी विच आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट आदिल टू एड्रेस अपने इस टॉक में कि ये सारा कुछ जो है अपार्ट फ्रॉम हैविंग अ फेथ पवेलियन इन दुबई, तो ये इंटरनेशनल ग्लोबल क्लाइमेट चेंज टारगेट वो टॉक्स में कहाँ पे होता है. वहाँ तो हम ये नारे लगा रहे थे इस दफ़ा भी बेलम में कि साइंस ओवर पॉलिटिक्स, कि ट्रंप साहब साइंस की नहीं सुन रहे, वो तो अपनी पॉलिटिक्स चला रहे हैं. तो ये फेथ एंड साइंस ओवर पॉलिटिक्स, ये कॉम्बिनेशन कैसे बनेगा. तो आदिल आई एम श्योर आप हमारे काफ़ी सारी जो हैं सवाल उनको एड्रेस करेंगे अपने इस वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक में. विल गेट बैक टू यू जब आप अपनी स्लाइडें दिखा लें जो सवाल रह जाएंगे. लेकिन
अभी और भी है.
दिस वाज आपका टॉपिक इतना इंटरेस्टिंग है. सो दिस इज अ प्रीएम्बल ऑफ माय क्वेश्चन, एंड एक्चुअली आई एम ट्राइंग टू प्रोवोक द ऑडियंस हियर टू थिंक ऑन दीज लाइंस कि अच्छा आपके ख्याल में ये जो काम है हाउ इट कैन स्ट्रेंथन और वीकन जो एग्जिस्टिंग हमारी क्लाइमेट चेंज को एक रेजिलिएंट बनने की सारी स्ट्रगल है, उसमें इसमें प्लस पॉइंट्स क्या हैं और चैलेंजेस क्या क्या आ सकते हैं, एंड देन हाउ टू ओवरकम दोस चैलेंजेस. ओवर टू यू आदिल.
वेरी टेक्नोलॉजी वर्किंग. मुझे एक सेकंड दीजिएगा. हाइड वीडियो पैनल आ गया. अच्छा, इट इज वंडरफुल टू बी हियर बैक हियर. एंड जैसे आबिद ने कहा जैसे आपने देखा एक्चुअली ये अब एनुअल रिचुअल बन गया है, आई थिंक कम से कम 15 साल तो हो गए, आई मिसिंग कोविड के अलावा। एंड यू वर ऑल्सो राइट कि इट इज अ टेस्टिंग ग्राउंड, और 3-4 बार ऐसे हुआ है कि तारिक बनूरी हैज शोन अप, फिर प्रेशर और बढ़ जाता है। बट इन अ वे इट इज गुड, क्योंकि मैं बताता हूँ कि मैं क्या सोच रहा हूँ, तारिक बताते हैं कि मैं किस तरह गलत हूँ, मैं जाके उनके आइडियाज अपने नाम से छाप देता हूँ, और फिर हम सब खुश रहते हैं। But I say this not just jokingly. I was thinking, there are at least four, maybe more, major things or major writings that I have done, which really started in this room or precursors to this room, आपके पिछले दफ्तरों में. Because एक अपनी audience होती है, it's good to कि आप थोड़ी सी शुरली फेंक के, you try to fish out क्या है. And this is very much like that. And because of what Abid said, so I won't take too much on the preamble. Last year, we had not done a presentation because I wasn't there. We had had a conversation, Abid and myself, कि ये faith और climate का जो link है, क्या है. It's a difficult thing to talk about. It's a very difficult thing to talk about. You will see why it's a difficult thing to talk about, because it can very easily go into where it has mostly gone in the literature. There's some very good literature, including by Pakistanis. Dr. Numan has a really good paper on this, which is mostly about कि जी Islam environment पे क्या कहता है, या Christianity environment पे क्या कहती है, या मेरा रिलीजन तेरे रिलीजन से ज्यादा ग्रीन है, मेरा खुदा आपके खुदा से ज्यादा सस्टेनेबल है, उस किस्म की चीजों पे. एंड देयर इज अ रीजन, आई विल आल्सो कम टू दैट. What I think one is trying to get a hold of, and this is the more important part, is that as we see our efforts not succeeding, right? So there are multiple people in this room who have spent their life trying to push this ball, and it is clearly clear that it's not succeeding. So either आप कह लें कि we are clutching at straws, कि कोई बहाना मिल जाए जिससे हम उसको पुश कर सकें, और वी आर ट्राइंग टू सीरियसली क्वेश्चन कि यार व्हाट हैव वी मिस्ड. एंड दैट इज द काइंड ऑफ line of thinking in which this comes. So just that by way of preamble, and to say I am not a scholar of religion, I do not intend to become one. मैंने किसी को बेहतर मुसलमान नहीं बनाना, लेकिन अगर बन जाए तो आपका ही फायदा है. लेकिन the point here is I'm coming very much from climate, very much for climate, and I put this first slide the way it is because this work has been done and wouldn't have been done without my being at Oxford the last 3-4 years. So I've been spending about 3 months a year at Oxford. I'd gone for my sabbatical at the Wolfson College, and they asked me to continue to be a fellow there. So every year now I spend about 3 months at Oxford, and one of the places I'm affiliated with there is the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, where I'm the Mahathir Mohammed Fellow. And they were the ones, they pursued me partly because they were being pursued by the person who's now King of England, who's their patron, Kiji, you must do something on environment, because he has a great interest. So the Center for Islamic Studies was searching for someone. उनको मैं नजर आया, उन्होंने कहा अच्छा जी कुछ करो. That's how it started, but this is important to what you will see in a minute. Of course, I remain a professor at BU, and that is really the other hat I'm wearing here. So just by way of demarcating, the hat that I'm not wearing here is WWF. वो आपने उस पे लिखा जरूर था. WWF actually has one of the oldest programs on belief and climate. It was started in the late 60s, including in Pakistan. There's a lot of interest. So I don't think anything I'm saying is opposed to what they are saying, but I speak for myself in those capacities and not. I have spoken to the panda. The panda is fine with this. I always consult the panda before I talk about anything. Coming to this, so since जब हमारी last बार बात हुई थी, there are few precursors to this, and I'm presenting really nearly fresh slides. शुरू वाली आपको कुछ लगेंगी कि some of you have seen them, and even though they have been changed slightly, and the later half is really all new. So caveat that there may be mistakes. So we launched this program on faith and climate change at Oxford at the Center for Islamic Studies. My push very much is that it's on faith. In fact, I would say it's on values, and within values, on values that come from faith. Because it's at the Center for Islamic Studies, it focuses much more on Islam, because that's sort of where my interest and my knowledge, or whatever limited it is. But the idea is not only about one religion or the other. We then did a series of two research workshops trying to figure out कि if you do something like this, the research agenda है क्या? And we did one in Oxford, May of last year, at another at Boston University, where I am in September, where we gathered people from multiple disciplines, truly interdisciplinary, and it was very interesting. Everyone was uncomfortable. The climate people were uncomfortable because we come from a lineage ke yaar science alag hai aur faith alag hai. The faith people were also, but we tried to get good people from all sides to talk about. And then I'm sorry I'm giving background zara zyada, lekin isme zaruri hai, I think important. Then just a few months back, we did a 3-day conference supported by the British Academy at Oxford, where we started trying to pull this together into is there something or not. And now we are in the final stages of a paper that we hope shall appear in Nature sometimes in the middle of the year on this issue. So ye hogi tamheed. What are the questions? I always start with 3 questions. People are familiar with this slide. Halaki question hamesha change hoti hai, tasveer wahi rehti hai. 3 questions. The first one you've heard before, but I think it's worth repeating, especially to my Pakistani colleagues, because I do think कई बार एक बात अगर सही हो तो उसको बारी बारी कहना चाहिए. And that is this point that I've been making for a while, that we need to listen to what the climate is telling us, right? Not what the IPCC is telling us, वो भी बड़ी अच्छी बात है, not what scientists or professors or SDPI or ministry or donors are telling us, but we actually need to just look out the window and start talking about climate in response to what we see outside the window, because people are responding to that. And this goes to what we'll talk about tomorrow also with urban and stuff. So question 1 on that, I'll say a few things about that. Second, how should we think about how we think about climate and Islam in this case, or faith? That's really the question, right? Because there is a literature, I will review it very quickly. उसमें मुझे कुछ नहीं नजर आया जो मैं ऐड कर सकता हूँ, which is about के कुरान क्या कहता है और हदीस क्या कहती है, right? मैं आपको वो रिपीट कर सकता हूँ, उसको इंस्पायर कर सकता हूँ, but to me the question and my entry point is कि as a climate person जिसका इंटरेस्ट ये है कि we are losing this battle despite what we have done, is there something to be done with faith? And in a way, the premise of this question is, if 85% of the world's people, 85% of the world's people, including people who say they have no religion, say that their values that relate to behavior come from their faith, then why are we afraid of religion and trying to tackle that if the climate problem is a behavior problem, right? चाहे वो state behavior or individual behavior or institutional behavior. Right? Whether you like it or not, why would we not? We work with business even when we think business is not good. We work with governments even when we think some governments may be corrupt. So why are we hesitant? And more than that, how do we think about that? And the first is, how can faith, in this case Islam, help address the climate crisis? Right? So this is not to legitimize one faith or the other. This is very, very pragmatic. तो मेरा एक काम है, मैंने किसी तरह कार्बन को करना है manage, and is there a role here or not, right? And our assumption is kuch hoga, kuch nahi hoga, right? So those are the 3 questions in general. I don't think we will come to answers, but that is the type of questions that we are heading with. I have a proposition, and the proposition is, that's too many words to put on a screen, so let me highlight it. The proposition is that the onset of climate change impacts, right? This goes to the age of adaptation that I've talked about here before. What has changed is impacts. What has fundamentally changed is that climate can no longer be talked about as a future issue. There is not a person in this room, there is probably not a person in any room who can claim to say, I have never seen climate change. It may be more, it may be less. किसी ने सैलाब देखा है, किसी ने ड्राउट देखी है, किसी ने शायद थोड़ी सी सिर्फ गर्मी देखी है, किसी ने कमरे में बैठ के देखी है, किसी ने सैलाब के बीच में देखी है. But there is a fundamental, my other talks are, there's a fundamental change जब impacts आ जाते, right? This is जो आप mitigation or adaptation की बात कर रहे हो. And that brings us to the arrival of what I've been calling the age of adaptation. You've heard that from me before. I won't go into that. And that demands a reimagination of the logic of politics, policy, and action as related to climate change. In a way, part of the diagnosis here is कि हम अभी तक एक और politics में फंसे हुए हैं, right? जो start होती है कि हमने 1% किया उससे, which is not wrong, लेकिन which becomes outdated जब impacts. When you are trying to solve a problem that has not yet emerged, the politics, the policy, and action is different. When you're trying in the middle of a problem that is happening, the previous problem hasn't gone away. That's the logic of the age of adaptation. And this is what we are talking about today, the logic of values as a driver of change. Right? So this is the proposition really, aakhri line. Okay, the logic of the values as a driver of change is becoming as central as the logic of science and economics. ये असली controversial part है. And कई बार मैं सोचता हूँ, maybe I'm saying it too strongly, कि अभी तक हमारी जो डिस्कशन है वो ड्राइव होती है या फ्रॉम अ पॉइंट ऑफ साइंस, आदिल नजम आएगा और बताएगा कि कार्बन कितनी बुरी है और क्या करती है, एंड आप उसका रिएक्शन करेंगे, और ए logic of economics, I will give you either a carrot or a stick, you will buy a Tesla or put solar panels or whatever, and that is, and one is proposing here that there is also a logic of values as a driver of behavior in terms of climate, and I'll come to that. So that's the big thing. I'll repeat a few slides that people have seen from the beginning. Before, maybe in Pakistan, I've presented the last couple of years, लेकिन कुछ चीजें इसमें change हुई, update हुई हैं, but they're worth repeating. So what is the climate telling us? What is the climate telling us? I always start and see, especially for people who are watching on Zoom, I number of years ago, actually maybe in this room, I decided that I would try to limit graphs that are in the future. So IPCC वगैरह में, you would always have 2070, 2080, 2100, and उसकी बड़ा एक चस्का होता है future देखने का. Then I realized कि my students and young people start thinking कि यार we have time, कि that's the framework in which हमने काम कर रहे हैं. जिस तरह गवर्नमेंट्स आती है ना, उनको 5 साल लगते हैं, वो जब आप 5 साल सोचते हैं कि अच्छा अभी तो टाइम है, और फिर वो खत्म हो जाते हैं. And so I've now started really very consciously trying to not put things in the future, but put things in perspective that people can remember. So what can people remember about 2020? Pandemic round number. 2 diseases आई थी दुनिया में बहुत बड़ी 2020 में. एक कोविड था, और दूसरा जो अभी तक नहीं गया, दूसरा जो था वो जूम था. जूम बहुत बड़ी बीमारी है, इसका कोई फायदा नहीं है सिवाय इसके कि आप बैकग्राउंड अच्छा लगा सकते हैं. दैट इज मी टीचिंग माय सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट क्लास ड्यूरिंग कोविड, वेयर वी हैड हाफ द स्टूडेंट्स इन देयर. बट अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, लेट मी रिमाइंड यू, 20 तो हर एक को याद है ना, that's not far enough not to remember. So let us remember what happened in 2020, right? All of this is from your Twitter lines, all of this is from newspaper. January 2020, hottest ever recorded year, hottest ever recorded January. February, आपने इस पे शायद ट्वीट शूट भी किया. Second hottest February ever recorded. March, second hottest ever. यहाँ कोविड आ गया तो फिर हमने बातें चेंज कर ली. April, second hottest ever. May, hottest May ever. ये सब, this we all remember reading, right? June, hottest June ever. July, second hottest July ever. August, second hottest August ever recorded since we've been recording global temperatures. September hottest, अब आपको कहानी समझ आ गई. दिसंबर में आपको थोड़ी सी छुट्टी मिली. It was 8th. What is special about this slide? Not a single one of these is now true. Each one of those months has been upped. Right? So, ये जो मैं argument, I'm going to belabor the argument that climate is here, impacts are here, therefore policy changes. I will put a few slides. वो हर slide तब बनी है जब मैं कोई talk दे रहा था. This I think was not here, ये कहीं और था. So this is a tweet I did April 29, 22, just based on my iPhone and जो temperature वाली होती है, where I wrote that nearly 1 billion people, yes, 1 billion, across South Asia only, are seeing temperatures of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, some cases 117. We are South Asians, we can deal with 100. But not in April, not for 1 billion people, right? change ये आई है, right? So we keep it changes everything when it happens for that many people. आप वो cities देख लें, फैसलाबाद, बीकानेर, आगरा, सिब्बी, अजमेर, लाहौर, रावलपिंडी, and so on and so forth. I was giving a talk यहाँ बैरिया यूनिवर्सिटी में, मेरे ख्याल में नेवी वालों की जो है, नहीं एयरफोर्स वालों, एयरफोर्स जो भी है, हाँ एयरफोर्स वालों की, and it was in July. Now if you see this graph, do you see that bottom जो dotted line है? That dotted line is what was the hottest day ever recorded at until the 2nd of July. Hottest day ever on the planet, right? For the planet as a whole. जुलाई 3 को रिकॉर्ड ब्रेक होता है, जुलाई 4 को जो ब्रेक हुआ है वो फिर से ब्रेक होता है, जुलाई 5 को जो ब्रेक होके ब्रेक हुआ है वो इक्वल हो जाता है, जुलाई 6 को वो भी टूट जाता है, जुलाई 7 को वी आर बैक टू ट्विटर विद द डांसिंग कैट बिकॉज देयर आर अदर थिंग्स टू डू इन द वर्ल्ड. The more important thing is the whole month is warmer than the warmest day, right? ये भी हमने अखबार में पढ़ा था. But the reason I'm belaboring this is that there is something fundamental happening here. Again, May, I think I was giving a talk somewhere in Europe and I put this, you would remember this big heat wave that was happening in May last year. And just for today, I looked up the latest numbers I could find as of this morning. So this graph is from the 24th of December, which is what, 6 दिन पहले, right? 6 दिन पहले. So again, I think ये graphic वाला ज़्यादती करते हैं because red doesn't mean that the world is burning. Red just means कि how much more than the average, right? So this is the surface temperature at 2 meter above Earth's surface. The more important way to understand this is this next graph. This is also from 6 days ago. वो जो red मोटी line है ना, that is this year for every day, right? This is the global temperature for every day. जो orange वाली है, that is for last year. So what that means is कि this time December में you won't be able to say कि hottest है. लेकिन जब month hottest नहीं भी है, then compare it to the dotted lines. Those are the averages, right? So the average is just moving up. I hope I have the number right. I think agar anyone here who is less than 49 or less than 49 years old, नहीं कोई तो होगा 49 से कम का, 49 या 49 से कम, मैं तो नहीं हूँ, ऐसे काफी है. आप मुबारक हो, आपको बहुत बहुत मुबारक हो. आपने अपनी जिंदगी में कभी ऐसा साल नहीं देखा which is cooler than average. as a planet, right? Again, I apologize for belaboring this, but I really think it needs to be belabored because what it means essentially is that climate is no longer a future issue, right? And you have probably seen this one before. It is worth seeing again. This is now what the world's temperature, global temperature, has been doing since we've been recording temperature. I hope people can see the numbers there. 1.5 wali line है, 1.5 wali, 2 wali, 2 पे है. This will stop at 2003, but you will already see के हो क्या रहा है, right? वो जो पिछला आप ग्राफ देख रहे थे ना कि लाइनें ऊपर जा रही हैं. So the average also keeps going up. And that is where you are. That doesn't mean we've crossed 1.5 yet, but essentially I will come to that in a minute, क्योंकि आपको the science of how do you do that average. Now you may be saying that is fine, Professor Saab, but I don't. मेरे कल तो मौसम बड़ा अच्छा था, हवा चल रही थी. So this is the same data put on a map of the world for every place on the world for which we have temperature since we have been measuring temperature. Right. So again, the point is if the global becomes local, remember that proposition, politics changes. It is no longer an abstract thing कि जी आपने अमेरिका में एमिशन की है तो तुम जब तक नहीं करोगे तो मैं कुछ नहीं करूंगा. सलाब तो पाकिस्तान में आना. So that argument for international mitigation is correct still. But the adaptation argument in Islamabad changes, in Lahore changes, in Karachi changes with extreme heat. Right? Karachi में 4 season होते थे, अब 5 होते हैं. I can tell you when the 5th one will start. I will tell you nearly 200 people will die. I can tell you they will mostly be migrant homeless or migrant workers, whether homeless or not, because they're working outside in the sea. That happens to be true not just for Karachi. There are now multiple papers written about this. This whole belt, even Bombay tak, Mumbai tak jati. Right? So it's global, it's local, it changes in that. 1.5, I know no science in the world. Right? Tariq might tell me I'm wrong. I don't think he will. I know no science in the world that can tell me that we can skip 1.5. The best we can hope for, is that we will overshoot, and then some of the, क्योंकि stabilization कुछ होनी शुरू भी हुई है, then we will be able to bring it back. Right? And that is where mitigation is, and that's where it should be. Probably we will go over 2 or 2.3 before we can bend the curve. लेकिन what that means, अगर आप पाकिस्तान हैं, या अगर आप लाहौर हैं, या कराची हैं, कि between 1.5 और 3 आपका climate तो change हो गया ना, वेट तो नहीं कर रहा. So that is what is changing this argument that we need to reconsider this. And that is what brings us to this age of adaptation, which I hope I have belabored the point is here, is now. I've taken too much time on this, so let me get to कि असली जो हमारा मुद्दा है. How does that happen? One, I'm glad I put this slide in. This slide is actually new. This no one in this room could have seen. This is जो आबिद का question है, partly एक वाला might be. So very briefly for non-climate people, all of you know it much better than what this will be. This is very simplistic. Mitigation essentially to me, mitigation is कि in this case, can we take mitigating steps so that जो बुरी चीज होने वाली है वो ना हो. So if we mitigate in time, then the impacts will not come. When many of us started in this field, we thought, I at least thought, कि हम ये कर लेंगे. We were arrogant or whatever, that we will be able to stop it in time, and therefore the clouds will still be starting. Adaptation to me is the failure of mitigation, but it is not the opposite of mitigation. If you fail to mitigate, फिर impacts आते हैं. But adaptation is what you can do to deal with those impacts, either as or before they come. And that is why it's kind of this umbrella. And part of where we are with the politics of climate change is कि एक तो अच्छी बात ये है कि we as humans, our superpower is adaptation. The reason we are in this room is because we are a super adaptive species. Right? सर्दी आती है, स्वेटर पहन लेते हैं. गर्मी आती है, पंखा बना लेते हैं. Right? So we are actually, as a species, extremely adaptive. We are not the only adaptive ones. All species have adaptation, but we have been super good at this. The problem is वो limerick है, rain it raineth every day on just and unjust fella, but more upon the just, because the unjust has his umbrella. The point is कि umbrella has a cost. Right? और cost का problem ये हो गया है, जो हमारी सारी politics है, COP वाली, COP, उसका problem ये है कि जिसने छतरी लेनी है, उसको पैसे देने पड़ेंगे छतरी के, लेकिन जिसने प्रॉब्लम पैदा किया, दैट्स द 1% आर्गुमेंट. वो सही है. Where I think, and this not all my friends agree with me, I insist in the memory of our dear departed friend Salimul Haq, उससे मैंने ये सीखा था कि loss and damage is not the same as adaptation. Many people still kind of think कि ये उसका कोई lost cousin है. Loss and damage to me is what happens if you don't adapt. So if adaptation is the failure of mitigation, loss and damage is the failure of adaptation. And I won't go into this, sorry, ये दूसरी presentation, but the bottom line of that is that the three are very different type of policy instruments. In general, mitigation policy is very often innovative policy. It is very often investment, right? आप Tesla में करें, आप renewables में करें, आप खिड़कियों पे करें. Adaptation policy, which I've, because of Salim, begun to like, I didn't as much, very often looks like development policy. Show me a really good adaptation project and I will show you a development project. Right? The problem with loss and damage is the same as with NDMA, not making a political statement. It comes after disaster. Right? आप adapt नहीं कर सके तो loss हुई या damage हुई. That looks very much like disaster policy. Disaster policy is rebuilding जिसका घर गिर गया, right? And so you want to hold it there. Okay, so that's one. The second is religion. So why are we afraid of religion? When I started that work, my thought was I would write, this would be the title of the article I would write. And इसका जवाब मैं आपको बता देता हूँ, and then I'll come to the, I've only a few more slides, but on the real topic. There was this gentleman, इसका नाम है लिन वाइट. इसने पेपर लिखा 1967 में in Science, And that paper is one of the most, amongst the most cited papers in all of Science magazine. दो पर्चे हैं साइंस में जो तकरीबन दोनों गलत तो नहीं है लेकिन तकरीबन गलत है, एंड दे आर द मोस्ट साइटेड एनवायरमेंटल पेपर्स इन द वर्ल्ड. एक वो उसका हार्डिन का ट्रेजेडी ऑफ कॉमन्स, गलत तो नहीं है बट हाँ, बट उसको जिस तरह सिंप्लीफाई हो गया. और दूसरा, और ये भी उसी किस्म का, बिकॉज बोथ आर कंसेप्चुअल and the concept is very strong, right? But because they are not empirical, he was a historian of medieval agriculture, and he threw out this idea that partly this ecological crisis is because of religion. He was mostly focused on Christianity, कि रिलीजन इन जनरल, क्रिश्चियनिटी इन पर्टिकुलर, हमारे बारे में भी शायद यही कहेंगे, वो इंसान को बीच में रख देता है ऑफ ऑल क्रिएशन, एंड देयरफॉर द कॉन्सेप्ट बिकम्स कि दुनिया मेरे लिए बनी है, everything here is to serve my needs, and that creates a whole thing. But you will be amazed how often he is cited. I'm just putting this in the hope that, if my hope is that some of you will find this interesting enough to work on this yourself. If we are in this world of adaptation that I'm talking about, where climate is no longer just about CO2, right? Age of adaptation में ये आप लोग सुन चुके हैं, इसलिए I'm not putting. The big change is that mitigation is essentially carbon management. It essentially boils down to carbon management. Carbon management mostly boils down to energy management, which is why so much. As soon as you're talking adaptation, carbon molecule आपका कुछ नहीं कर सकता. Right? वो तो हो गया. Now it is about water, now it is about heat, now it is about ecosystems, and so on and so forth. In that, if we put these two things together, then we start seeing these pictures of especially recent disasters. And I started making a list जब मैंने शुरू किया कि if religion was being talked about in climate change, and the simple Google type of searches in different places. And it turns out that when people pray, they pray, a lot of the prayers are about weather. बारिश आ जाए, बारिश रुक जाए, बारिश थोड़ी और हो जाए, बारिश 2 हफ्ते आगे हो जाए, ये बारिश बंद हो जाए, ये जो ज़लज़ला खैर ज़लज़ला is not weather, but so on and so forth. And we saw this across, certainly in Pakistan, all across India, across Africa, across Southeast Asia. And you would see a lot of pictures like this too, right? And you would see also these pictures about, and other people better than me have started working on this aspect, कि, सब कुछ तबाह हो गया, the only thing standing is a religious structure. Right? And उसकी आप different interpretation कर सकते हैं, but one logical interpretation is we usually make religious structures to be stronger. We usually make them in a place that is more prominent, पहाड़ी के ऊपर या कहीं. And the thing I'm talking about, which a lot of work is now happening, including by WWF, is getting to use religious structures as disaster relief, right? Training religious clergy in that. और वो ट्रेनिंग सिर्फ ये नहीं है कि जब मेरा घर चला जाए तो मैं किधर जाके सोऊंगा, जब मेरा घर चला जाए और मेरा बच्चा भी चला जाए उसके साथ, there is counseling, there is mental health, there is all sorts of things. And the clear thing is कि जब आप पे सलाब आता है, you do not go and look up the latest report from IPCC. You look up and say, why me? मैं की कितना सी, right? So that is partly where this is coming from. इतनी लंबी कहानी बना के the logic comes here. This is where I'm afraid of Tariq being in the room. लेकिन if I look back at a very broad level, so we came to this problem as we come to many problems thinking कि यार we are rational beings. Therefore, मैं आपको जब समझा दूंगा कि साइंस ये कहती है, you will rationally take the right decision and reduce your carbon. Right? We do that with many things. We do that with smoking. We do that with health, har cheez, right? And then we came to the realization we are rational beings. People do that, but we are not entirely rational beings, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't look like this. I would start eating better. So rationality की एक limit होती है where we can, and you can kind of see it, Tariq, also in the IPCC की evolution. पहली 2 reports mostly science ही कह रही. At some point we came, I would say 90s, 2000s में, to the realization that yaar, only science is not going to do it, because people are not just rational, they're also greedy. And therefore, they're greedy, I'm not saying in a pejorative sense, they work on incentives. And all of economic policy, or much of economic policy in terms of climate, boils down to either I will give you a carrot or a stick to change your behavior. मैं आपको सब्सिडी दे दूंगा या मैं आपको पेनल्टी लगा दूंगा, right? And because you are greedy, you will change your behavior accordingly. And अगर मैं उसकी pricing ठीक कर लूंगा, you will, right? And the argument here is that too we have found has limits. People are greedy, people do react to incentives, but people clearly do not react only to incentives. And incentives are multivariate and so on and so forth. And therefore, the argument comes that we are also moral beings, right? That point I said, 85% of the people says our values impact our behavior, and the principal source of our values are religion. To me, the interesting part is including people who say हमारा कोई religion. उसकी वजह यह है कि आपको बचपन में खाना कैसे है, पानी कैसे पीना है. It becomes embedded behavior, right? And that's the reason to go to religion. I'm sorry, I'm taking long, but please bear with me. अब अगर हम मुस्लिम पे आते हैं तो then ये वाला तो तय है कि there's a lot of literature कि इस्लाम में कितना ग्रीन है और कितनी हदीसें हैं और कितना कुरान में है. I won't repeat it. It's actually greatly motivating. लेकिन उसमें एक प्रॉब्लम है कि अगर रिलीजन इतना ग्रीन है तो मेरे से क्या हुआ? बिकॉज आई गो अराउंड द मुस्लिम वर्ल्ड, मुझे तो नहीं नजर आता कोई ग्रीन. तो या तो हम कोई मुसलमान अच्छे नहीं, या देयर इज समथिंग एल्स हैपनिंग बिटवीन व्हाट वी से वी बिलीव इन and what happens. So the first question really was, okay, what is the Muslim world, right? And this becomes important, I hope, in a minute. One way to look at it is countries that say they are Muslim, the Islamic Conference वाली, वो ये मैप बन जाता है. Another way to look at it कि not कि वो कहते क्या हैं, लेकिन what percentage of a country are Muslims, right? The map starts looking different. आपको रशिया भी फर्क नजर आता है, यूरोप भी थोड़ा सा फर्क नजर आता है. Another way to look at it is how many Muslims live where. The map suddenly starts looking very South Asian, right? कि कौन से मुस्लिम कितने कहाँ रहते हैं, and Europe starts looking and US starts looking and so on and so forth. Now if you take this and you also look at where climate impacts are coming, वो जो आप कह रहे थे ना fatalistic वाली, I'm not trying to be fatalistic, I'm saying that there's just a empirical reality here that if you merge this map with the previous map, तो वो इकबाल वाला की बर्फ गिरती है तो बेचारे मुसलमानों पर, right? For whatever reason, when you merge the map of where the vulnerability is the most sort of immediately vulnerable geographies with where many Muslims live, to me that is not a causal statement. उसकी वजह से नहीं है, ऐसा नहीं कि अल्लाह मियां में ढूंढ रहा था. I think was simply it is an empirical statement of demography and reality, and therefore an opportunity to use it in that way, right? Now, what I did from there was, rather than going into के इस्लाम में environment के बारे में क्या है, I looked at what are we saying is needed for what I'm calling the age of adaptation in the COP, in environmental literature. What are we saying are the type of behavior changes or behavior attitudes that people in the climate world, without reference to religion, are talking about, right? And I came up with this list of 7. This is sort of referenced and काफी सारी वो international agreements है कि better economics होनी चाहिए, institutional innovation होनी चाहिए, reduction in waste, rewarding of conservation, a lot about natural resource management, climate justice, Abid जो आप कह रहे थे, and relationship with nature. I won't waste your time here, but this is highly referenced in legal documents without reference to. Now I merged this with the religion that is coming on Islam and environment, and said के बजाय मैं उससे शुरू करूं कि वो क्या रहा है. What is being said about these things? And that is where it becomes much more interesting to me, right? That there are in fact tools and ideas, but because they were coming from religion, they haven't been sort of linked as better economics and this concept of mizan. That's why the UNEP document is called Al Mizan, this concept of balance, right? And again, there's serious commentaries on this, which can actually be read as fairly serious commentaries on environment if you link them. That's the agenda we are trying to set. Innovation on institutions. My favorite, not the only example, is Waqf. Right? If you think about ये जो आपकी अभी कौन था बिलम में आप थी वो क्या साइन हुआ है आर फॉरेस्ट फॉर एवर वाला, फॉरेस्ट और उसकी फैसिलिटी का आप डॉक्यूमेंट पढ़ें एंड इट काइंड ऑफ इज अ ग्लोबल वर्क, राइट? यू आर सेटिंग अप अ ट्रस्ट फॉर the tropical forest, Amazon, but not just the Amazon, also the Congo and so on and so forth. Right? So what I'm saying is I'm not trying to force it. I'm saying that yeah, there is something that might resonate with people who come from this tradition, so that they start looking at this as their issue. अभी तो हम देखते हैं ना किसी और का issue. Reduction of waste, in fact, is all over the place. Reduction of waste, not just in Islam, but israf ka jo concept hai, and I will come to that in a minute, but all across in very, very strong terms. My favorite, which I did not, this concept of hima, which is the keeping natural landscapes natural for long periods of time. It can be, and this goes back to the time of the Prophet and so on and so forth, groves of olive trees, it can be wells, it can be, when you take a natural resource and, as a matter of policy, sort of truncate it from other uses. And just now, national park banate na in a way. Okay, this will remain over long periods. Khalifa ka concept is widely talked about in this literature. Again, I'm going through this fast because I want to do one Jugatbazi and then I will end. Adil, of course, just given my name, I have a special reverence for, but climate justice and Adil in terms of also environment and natural species, including Adil to other species and animals and so on and so forth. You find sort of all sorts of these things. जैसे मैंने कहा वो literature मौजूद है. And finally, this concept of nature, nature की relationship क्या है, which goes to Lynn White's original comment. Okay, are we dominant? And the response of that in the literature is, this is a Khilafat concept. You are custodian, not owner. You are custodian for the next generation. And again, widely cited on the religious side as well as on the linkage side. So that is the type of thing, and I'm beginning to wrap up. I'm sorry I'm taking long, but I hope it is useful. The type of questions that all of this gave us in those things give what the research agenda should be, right? Things that can be actually researched. At least चार बड़े उसमें सवाल थे. पहला ये कि how to link environmental policy to ethics and values. In a way, one would argue, again, without too much detail, Greta, who's probably entirely sort of secular in the deepest sense, is saying the same things. Right? She's saying a lot of people are now saying, this is a matter of value. It doesn't matter कि तुम्हारी cost benefit क्या कहती है. Right? It is, and I'm going to take a lot of young people are talking about climate environment as a matter of values for themselves. And they're behaving that way. And that is why this question is important. The second is how to convert belief into better environmental behavior. This is the most tough one. I'm amongst friends, I hope. I'll be straightforward. The CDC baat hi hai. It is very easy for me to say how green Islam is. It is nearly impossible for me to look at Muslims and Muslim countries and say कि वो belief जो है action में कहीं translate हो रही है. That is probably true for other religions too. Lekin that's a question worth asking, right? That's a question, good point of entry to start into action. कि how do you turn it into actual behavior? The third, how might climate impact faith practices? Actually, we have a few young people, postdocs, who are doing this. कि इस पे हज पे इसका क्या असर पड़ेगा? इससे पहले भी काम हुआ. Saudi Arabia, for example, is spending huge money, McKinsey पे ज़ाया कर देता है, on what it's going to do with water for Umrah and Hajj, and so on and so forth. So there are very practical, fundable questions कि कुंभ मेले पे क्या असर पड़ेगा, right? And so on and so forth. And of course, to be fair and honest, where are the lines of possible contradiction, right? तो सबसे बड़ी ये है कि यार अगर अल्लाह की मर्जी है तो तुम कौन होते हो उसको चेंज करने वाले? My simple answer is अल्लाह की मर्जी है तो अल्लाह पे रहने देना, आप उसको एक्सेलरेट क्यों कर रहे हैं? Why are you trying to जल्दी लाने की जरूरत नहीं है ना क़यामत को, जब आएगी तो आ जाएगी. I want to, before I end, give you a little one case study, which is of something that many people can relate to very easily, which is wuzu. Right? So here is a practice that billions of people do multiple times a day, right? And on which The scripture is very, very clear कि आपसे क्या मांगता है, and water की वजह से the science is very, very clear कि उसमें वो क्या है. Now, I'm not suggesting कि वजू से दुनिया का पानी का मसला हल हो जाएगा, वो नहीं होगा, right? But as a matter of behavior, it is a really interesting one. So it turns out that there is studies, and we've now commissioned नहीं हमारे students के साथ too, कि हम वजू करते क्या, क्योंकि it is such a important and usual everyday thing, and for many places it's a very important policy decision. मैंने सऊदी अरेबिया का जिक्र किया, but it's not the only one. I was sad कि पाकिस्तान में नहीं हुई, but I was surprised कि वैसे कितनी हुई. So this is the graph you see, is how much water is used on average in various elements of the wuzu. Right? इसको अगर आप थोड़े से गौर से देखेंगे तो you will start figuring out why this is important. A few things from this is a sort of meta-analysis from multiple studies. Right? The water use per wuzu turns out to be between 3.5 to 10 liters. The average is 7.5. We also tried median, वो भी तकरीबन उधर ही था. Right? So we will assume कि आप लोग तकरीबन 7-7.5 लीटर वजू में इस्तेमाल करते हैं. It depends also on wealth, and I'll tell you what else it depends on. About 1/3 to half of the water that is used in wuzu is never used in wuzu. Right? So, and the answer is actually very simple. The answer is taps. Right? Basically, जो change है वो टूटी वाली है. And again, I'm not trying to say कि सही किया है गलत किया है. That's not my business. I'm trying to link an act to a set of policy things. You will see if you go to Makkah, they've been changing the taps actually to Hajj वगैरह. So this is serious matter because it adds up. And वो चाहे वो आपका वो प्रेस करने वाला हो या वो सेंसर वाला हो, there are various things to do that. So taps matter, and as I said, there's an actual literature in it. Hajj के वक्त पे तकरीबन 65 million liters a day is the water that is used in the middle of a desert. Zamzam का जो सिर्फ पानी है is 2 million liters a day. Right? So again, serious questions, serious analysis needed, serious study needed, including here. As I said, I was sad कि मुझे पाकिस्तान पे नहीं मिला, but there are these things from various countries, from Abu Dhabi, from Jordan, and from Malaysia. Basically in mosques, and again, they are limited studies, so I wouldn't say कि पूरी मुल्क का ये, लेकिन the studies that are done, the single largest used in water use in mosques, especially large ones, is wuzu, which can be 70% or more. Right? So we, for example, again, मैं WWF के लिए नहीं बात कर, but in Pakistan we already have a program where we work with mosques to reuse the wuzu water, because वो actually reuse के लिए भी आसान है. It doesn't have chemicals and so on and so forth as much. Government college, university जो बन गई है, उनके साथ we are now doing for recharge, because that's a more important use of it. In other places, we are doing it for sort of growing vegetation and so on and so forth. But the point is कि ये significant significant chunk है within that. Now I come to a little pontification जिसकी मैं आपसे माजर चाहूंगा, लेकिन the reason I do it is कि wuzu also happens to be one of those highly learnt behavior. आप बच्चे होते हैं और माँ आपको सिखाना शुरू कर देती है और आप उस वक्त मजबूर होते हैं सीखने पे, और जैसे ही आपको सिखाया जाएगा वो आपकी आदत बन जाती है, चाहे आप वुजू ना भी करें. Right? So that is the power of religion. A lot of religion is highly learnt behavior, and therefore can have an impact. Again, I'm not saying इससे मसले हल हो जाएंगे. So turns out, और इस पे आपको बड़ी वीडियोस मिलेंगी इंटरनेट पे जो बताएंगी कि कैसे यूज करना चाहिए, मैं उसमें नहीं जा रहा. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, used this thing that was called a mud. I think mud कहते हैं, which was a unit of measure. Right? So a mud was about slightly more bigger than this, 0.66 liter. Right? तो तकरीबन डेढ़ एक glass. Right? And that was the amount of water he used. Doesn't say कि आपको इतना करना चाहिए. That is what he used. Mud, it's actually very interesting. The mud was a unit of measurement of solids as well as liquids. You could, if you're buying grain, you would buy it, and so on and so forth. So the amount the Prophet used, आप समझ लें, तकरीबन इस glass से थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा है. right? And I wish I'd known कि मैं ये बोलूँगा, I have a replica of this that I sometimes use in this presentation. इस वक्त नहीं है, so please assume कि वो ये glass है. Now अगर वो ये glass है तो आप कितना use करते हैं? My estimation 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Right? The interesting thing is, again, मैं किसी को change करने के चक्कर में नहीं हूँ. I'm trying to say something else. The assumption is कि अगर तहारत अच्छी चीज है और सफाई अच्छी चीज है तो ज्यादा तहारत ज्यादा सफाई तो और अच्छी होगी. Right? That must be even better. On this, religion is actually very clear. Extremely clear. Multiple ahadith, including the one that I put in, where one of his favorite sahabis is wuzu kar rahe the. And the Prophet chides him कि तुम पानी क्यों जाया कर रहे हो? And he turns around and says कि जी वुजू में जाया कैसे हो सकता है? ये तो मैं अल्लाह की राह में कर रहा हूँ. And the Prophet's response is कि even if you are at the edge of a brimming river and there waste one drop of water, you are answerable for it. Right? आप अगर रिलीजन छोड़ भी दें, आप डेजर्ट के बीच में बैठे हैं, it makes full sense. Right? There is a reason why Islam has so much on water, Buddhism has so much on forest. कि एक लोकेल भी है ना जिसमें लोगों को समझाया जा रहा है. So this idea of surf जो है is a very clear one. So अगर ये है what the Prophet used. So let me just demonstrate. I'm sorry मैं prepared नहीं था, so मैंने अपने भाई के घर में मुझे जो कुछ मिला मैं ले आया हूँ. So let me show you how much we use. That's the difference. Sorry. मुझे जो बोतल मिली है मैं प्लास्टिक की उठा लाया हूँ, हालांकि इसको रिसाइकिल होना चाहिए था. एंड दैट और ये कम है, एंड दैट इज व्हाई आई आस्क यू कि जग है या नहीं, इसमें ये जग भी शामिल कर. Right? So that is the difference. Now again, my point is not that हमें इस्लाम में क्या करना चाहिए, लेकिन अगर learnt behavior ये है कि आपने जाया नहीं करना versus learnt behavior ये है कि जितना ज्यादा इस्तेमाल करो उतना बेहतर है, that adds up to have a difference. Right? And it's a simple example, but that's the point. Absolutely ending. So if those were the questions, what are the type of answers we are coming from? We haven't come to answers. We're trying to set an agenda and get people working. One is this green to up, second sort of finance, because green finance is such a big thing. Is there a Islamic green finance on some of these things? The most interesting work is being done in Malaysia. For the same reason, agar aap Islamic banking dekhen, most of the rules started fermenting in Malaysia. उनका वो फतवे का सिस्टम भी फर्क है, उनकी उस स्ट्रक्चर भी फर्क है, and a lot of that. So is there an equivalent to interest-free account or zakat eligible donation, जो philanthropy में has brought about a change in green financing, especially at the local adaptation stage? I'm not sure ये वो big वाली stage पे है, but at the mosque, at the community, at the village. The second is this idea of waste as a general proposition, right? Which is across the thing. And जो आप फोन पे हम बात करते कि जी हम तो हैं ही ऐसे, right? If you say कि हम change इसलिए करें कि the US is saying, that's a different argument. If you say here is also a faith-based reason. Faith as infrastructure is one of my favorite things. We forget how much of infrastructure is faith-based. We think of the Pope and the Vatican as owning properties. This is also becoming important in education. I did something with the Malala Fund on this. Faith-based infrastructure is everywhere, is very often multi-use, community use infrastructure. And as we think, especially with disasters of disaster relief infrastructure, faith-based infrastructure is already very important. And then this idea of nature-based solutions, चाहे वो वक्फ का हो, चाहे वो, for example, I had not realized कि आप वक्फ में अमूमन आप पैसा या प्रॉपर्टी करते हैं, but you can make a वक्फ out of trees. And there are multiple around the world कि ये उन्होंने ग्रोव जो है ये वक्फ में डाल दिया गया. And even I think up in the north of Pakistan, this practice in various forms has happened. So those are the type of things we are saying ought to be explored. My apologies for taking too long, but as you can see, I was having too much fun. And thank you again. But again, to remind you, this is work very much in progress, thoughts very much in progress. I would love to hear reactions.
Thank you very much, Adil. And as you said, it's a work in progress. I'll open the floor. We'll collect 3-4 questions, and we can have at least 3 rounds of these questions. Some questions I think to begin with, I used my chair's prerogative and asked in the beginning, so that perhaps many of them you will, and we have addressed quite a few of
कुछ और बाकी को मैं explicitly
them, और उसको आप देख लीजिएगा. एक जो कमेंट में क्विक देना चाह रहा था, अगर आप एक मैप बनाएं, आपने बिल्कुल मैप बनाया वो जो मुस्लिम डेमोग्राफी और क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबिलिटी का, अगर हम एक क्रिश्चियन डेमोग्राफी और क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबिलिटी का मैप बनाएं तो शायद आपको अफ्रीका जो है वो बहुत ज़्यादा वल्नरेबल नज़र आएगा. सो ऑफ कोर्स क्रिश्चियन बेस्ड इन वेस्टर्न हेमिस्फेयर, perhaps because of their wealth and because of their resilient coping mechanism, वो आपको उतने ज़्यादा क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबल नज़र नहीं आएंगे. लेकिन अफ्रीका जो है वो आएगा. तो इट वुड बी एन इंटरेस्टिंग कंपैरिजन अगर आप अपने इस काम में ये डेमोग्राफी जो है दोनों साउथ एशिया और फिर अफ्रीका, ये दोनों डेमोग्राफीज आप दिखा सकें. दूसरी चीज़ जो मैं देख रहा था वो ये है कि हम अक्सर रिलीजियस होते हैं, बन जाते हैं व्हेन एवर देयर इज अ स्ट्रेस, देयर इज समथिंग व्हिच इज़ बियॉन्ड our control or beyond our tolerance, तो फिर हम बहुत ज़्यादा रिलीजियस हो जाते हैं. एंड climate stress actually has invoked religiosity. जो सोसाइटीज़ जो हैं जहाँ पे सर्टेनिटी ज़्यादा है, यहाँ पे आपको फोरकास्टिंग ज़्यादा आसानी से, तो वहाँ हम ये दुआ नहीं मांगते या अल्लाह गड्डी टाइम पे आ जाए, या अल्लाह ट्रैफिक बंद ना हो, या अल्लाह आगे जो है वो कोई हड़ताल ना हो रही हो मैंने पहुँचना है. तो वहाँ पे आप अपने क्रिएटर को ज़्यादा याद करते हैं. तो ये जब हम बात करते हैं इस होल क्लाइमेट डिस्कशन और डिबेट की, विच इज़ मोर ऑन मोर लीगलिस्टिक एंड सेकुलर, तो उस पर मैं देखना चाह रहा था कि इस फेथ को हम किस तरीके से लेके आएंगे. एंड माई वेरी फाइनल, फिर मैं फ्लोर से लेता हूँ कि क्या आप सोचिएगा कि what does a faith aware adaptation strategy look like in Pakistan? तो अगर हम कह रहे हैं पाकिस्तान में हमारे पास अब नेशनल अडेप्टेशन प्लान भी है, SDPI डिस्ट्रिक्ट अडेप्टेशन प्लान भी बना रहा है, वी हैव ग्लोबल अडेप्टेशन प्लान. तो ये जो फेथ अवेयर अडेप्टेशन स्ट्रेटजी है ये क्या बनेगी? और इसी से रिलेटेड ये है कि देन वेयर डज स्टेट रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी एंड्स, तो कहाँ पे होगा कि फिर स्टेट जो है वो बाकी सारी चीज़ें कुदरत पे छोड़ देगी और कुछ चीज़ें जो है वो कर पाएगी. सो दीज आर माई जस्ट लाउड थिंकिंग. बट लेट मी स्टार्ट विद तारिक. आप पेन पे कर लीजिएगा. आई हैव ताहिर हियर, आई हैव उबैद, आई हैव ज़ैनब, वन मोर. चलें ताहिर, आपसे स्टार्ट करते हैं.
In this room who cannot understand Urdu, I think I should keep myself to do with Adil. I was, one is on a very lighter side as well, but it's a serious demand. Other agenda, I'll be very quick on that. You have mentioned Islam and faith and biggest 3 polluters are China, USA, and India. None of them is Islam. It seems that those who don't want to stop using petroleum because dollar is connected to that and all that, and they somehow have a vested interest. Already the part of the world which is trodden down should mitigate and all that. In a very lighter way, Ain ke tanazar mein Fazlur Rahman of climate change, they're putting it as an icon. Second is, I was thinking, we have seen a lot of cults. These kamikazes, it was a cult. then all these this Al Qaeda who now hold Syria. It was a cult created by CIA. We all know that. It's very, very clear. Then there was a cult created which we created and we killed in North Waziristan. Then there was a cult that we created and it ended in Muridke. In Bangladesh, we created a cult. In mosque, we mobilized mosque for family planning and all that. And now it is very clear that the change in thinking which that cult for development of women liberation and family planning has provided the turf for what is happening in Bangladesh now. So it's very clear now. In India and also, what will become of this cult that we create if they say nature is God and God is nature? At some time, there should be some regulatory framework. Do you think we are creating another freak?
थैंक यू सो मच डॉक्टर आदिल और क्योंकि मैं अब बहुत से ऐसे क्वेश्चंस हैं जो मेरे माइंड में तब भी पॉप अप करते हैं और जो लोगों की तरफ से आते हैं वी नो दैट फेथ इज मोबिलाइज्ड विद इन कम्युनिटीज एंड सो इज एडेप्टेशन हमारा नेशनल एडेप्टेशन प्लान है जिसमें हमें डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडेप्टेशन प्लान्स बनाने हैं और व्हाट वी आर वर्किंग ऑन इज कम्युनिटी बेस्ड कम्युनिटी नरेटिव इंटीग्रेशन इंडिजिनस नॉलेज और बॉटम अप अप्रोच के साथ प्लान बनाए वहां पे जब हम लोग हाउस होल्ड लेवल पे जाके और फार्मर्स लेवल पे जाके क्वेश्चन करते हैं तो देखिए अब बुनेर में सैलाब आता है तो लोग कहते हैं अल्लाह का अजाब है बड़े बड़े पत्थर है सिंध में जब सैलाब का पानी जाता है वो कहते हैं शुक्र है हम पे खुदा की रहमत हुई और कराची में सुनामी नहीं आ सकता क्योंकि देयर इज अ श्राइन इन देयर राइट बलूचिस्तान में जाते हैं तो वो कहते हैं कि अच्छा हुआ नॉर्थ साइड पे है क्योंकि हमें हमारे यहाँ कूक नहीं दे रहे ये अल्लाह का अजाब है यू नो आई एम बीइंग वेरी वोकल एंड देन केपी थोड़े और अंदरूने केपी जाते हैं तो यूनियन काउंसिल लेवल पे लोग कहते हैं बिकॉज देयर आर इनजस्टिसेस एट पॉलिटिकल लेवल दैट्स व्हाई द गवर्नमेंट इज फेसिंग दिस लेकिन जब हम अडेप्टेशन प्लान बना रहे होते हैं और ये बात जब हम पॉलिसी लेवल पे जाके या लेट्स से डिस्ट्रिक्ट गवर्नमेंट लेवल पे जाके करते हैं तो ये वाले नरेटिव्स टोटली डिसोन कर दिए जाते हैं कि ये नरेटिव नहीं लेके जाना एक किसान कहता है कि हमने पिछले साल इसने मेरी जमीन हड़प ली तो अल्लाह का अजाब उस पर आया इसीलिए ये सैलाब के अंदर चली गई जमीन अडेप्टेशन प्लानिंग में हमारे लिए सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज ये आ रहा है कि जब हम वो वाले नरेटिव्स लेकर आते हैं और हम सजेस्ट करते हैं कि आप मस्जिदों में खुतबे में इस चीज को इंटीग्रेट करें आई ऑल्सो वर्क ऑन सर्कुलरिटी सो ये सजा जजा का कॉन्सेप्ट एंड देन वेस्टेज को रिड्यूस करना तवाजन वी वांट दिस टू बी इंटीग्रेटेड एट दैट लेवल बट देन दीज थिंग्स आर बीइंग डिसोन्ड एट पॉलिसी लेवल सो जो ब्लर्ड लाइंस हैं अब इसमें सिर्फ रिलीजन या फेथ नहीं है इसमें कल्चरल बिलीफ सिस्टम भी आता है और इंडिजिनस नॉलेज जिसको पॉलिसी लेवल पे थोड़ा डिसोन कर दिया जाता है और उसकी मिसाल ऐसे है कि आपकी जितनी क्लाइमेट की पॉलिसीज बनाई हुई हैं उसमें से आपके बिहेवियरल एस्पेक्ट को टोटली और फेथ बेस्ड एस्पेक्ट को टोटली निग्लेक्ट किया हुआ है इन्फोर्समेंट का इशू वहां आ रहा है एक और चैलेंज जो हमने देखा जब अडेप्टेशन प्लानिंग हम बनाते हैं तो हमें फाइनेंशियल प्लानिंग पे भी बात करनी होती हम उनको कहते हैं कि ये आपकी डेवलपमेंट ही है अडेप्टेशन में सर्व करना वो उस चीज को फॉर एग्जांपल अगर चारसद्दा की एक यूनियन काउंसिल में हमें इरिगेशन पंप हम प्रपोज करें मेक इट पार्ट ऑफ जो आपको डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पे फंड्स मिल रहे हैं अडेप्ट डेवलपमेंट वो उस चीज को लिंक नहीं कर पाते सो हमारे लिए चैलेंज है कि कम्युनिटीज अंडरस्टैंड करती हैं अडेप्टेशन को बेटर देन दोज सिटिंग एट द पॉलिसी टेबल एंड मेकिंग पॉलिसीज इन्फोर्समेंट का चैलेंज टॉप लेवल से ये आ रहा है कि दे आर नॉट एबल टू लिंक इट सो व्हाट इज योर स्टांस ऑन दैट थैंक यू
Third question for this round. Ji, yes.
Where is the mind your previous program national authority
Yeah, Khalid.
So in terms of looking at the unit of analysis taking from the international politics jargon, previously the focus always remained around international institutions, mobilization of funds, access to finance, so on and so forth. With regards to today's subject, I think we are moving more towards an individual as compared to the state or maybe the international level. Maybe that is somehow emphasizing what it's sort of putting the burden or that onus of responsibility on the individual rather than perhaps the state that should have been providing the safety nets. Brings me back to your map around countries that are more vulnerable. Maybe that is the difference. Maybe the state's role in those countries has been the game changer and not the individuals. Thank you.
जी आप should I? You want to take more? नहीं thank you जी thank you. Yeah, these are great questions. These are great questions, and as you know, when someone says they're great questions, that means they have no answer for them. So I'm just fishing for time. And many of these questions don't have answers. I think they're good thoughts. So I won't go into all of them. Like maybe just reactions. So let me go through a few very quickly. जो आप कह रहे हैं कि international global, my sense is that this is catching interest. So I've been now 2-2.5 साल हो गए. One amazing interest I get is the number of engineers who visit my office now and want to meet me has जो पाकिस्तानी है मुसलमान है, that's gone up. वो उनका जो है इस्लाम का है कि they feel कि something they relate to, someone is trying to link to that. But the other is international institutions have. We've seen that with the Faith Initiative at UNEP. We've seen that with young people who are not talking about religion, but they're talking about values. There's just something right and wrong about what we are doing. And जो मैं पहले कह रहा था कि because other things are not working, so everyone is trying to figure out कि is there something with that. जो था why not mitigation? I hope partly, maybe I came late to the party, but mitigation may, I think, we were very much focused on the science part of it, right? And because it became so policy focused, that was the lever कि हम एक बजट पहले फैसला कर लेंगे और फिर हम incentives का फैसला कर लेंगे और सारी मशीन उससे चलेगी. I think it is that failure of something was needed. Also, I think, if I am right, and I'll use this word again and again, so if you remember any one word, it's behavior. I'm not talking policy. And I would very much caution you कि हमारा problem policy है, लोगों का नहीं है. आपका प्रॉब्लम है कि आपको गवर्नमेंट से डील करना पड़ता है. लोगों का प्रॉब्लम उनका बिहेवियर है. पॉलिसी आइदर मेक्स दैट बिहेवियर मोर डिफिकल्ट और मोर एक्सपेंसिव और मोर इजी. तो आप अपने प्रॉब्लम ना सॉल्व करवाएं लोगों से, नहीं, इन अ गुड वे. सो आई डू नॉट थिंक यहाँ कोई गवर्नमेंट रिलीजियस पॉलिसी बनाना शुरू कर दे खुदा ना खास्ता. आई एम नॉट श्योर दैट्स अ गुड थिंग एनी हाउ. So that is why the word I began with is behavior. And behavior pe, there's a lot of new interest from behavior science and others ke how do we do that. Uski मैं critique भी बता देता हूँ, because no one has mentioned it yet, others will later. Uski critique ये है कि जो partly you were getting at, कि you put the problem on individuals, right? कि मैं recycle bag ले लूँगा या मैं जो हूँ मैंने गाड़ी ठीक लेनी है, right? You're putting the cost as well as the responsibility on individuals, and it doesn't add up. And if wuzu ki, the story is interesting, but water problems are not going to be solved by wuzu alone, right? So to me, the answer is that the two things go together. This is not a substitute for policy. It is not a substitute for nations not doing what they're doing. Working with individuals is not a substitute for that. I'll jump to your question. Uspe mera answer sabse, for years, certainly in this room and every other room, my point has been, jab aap internationally deal kare, your focus should be on getting them to do mitigation. When you're talking about national policy, our focus has to be on the livelihoods and well-beings of Pakistanis. Problem, I think, is that we have not made this a Pakistani issue. Partly funding उधर से आती है, funding के साथ narrative उधर से आती है, not in a bad way, जो देगा क्यों नहीं देगा, right? And then we own that, and then we repeat the same terms, and we become experts because we are saying the same thing. Again, there's nothing wrong with this. Lekin the big challenge of climate and environmental policy in Pakistan is, I do not think we have succeeded in making environment or climate a Pakistani issue. In some ways, climate might do what we haven't done. The flood did that, right? Because वो आके ठा करके लगता है. The heat wave in Karachi does that. The smog does that. This goes to, I hope, what we'll talk about tomorrow. कि what is happening now is कि something is just hitting us कि मैंने लाहौर 10 बजे के लिए निकलना है कि 11 बजे के लिए निकलना है क्योंकि रोड बंद होनी, right? So in a way there is an opportunity in that, and that I think is where our role as researchers or policy entrepreneurs come कि can we change the narrative. आप जब कराची में हीट की बात करते हैं या लाहौर में स्मॉग की बात करते हैं तो आई थिंक यू कैन अनलॉक अ होल सेट ऑफ न्यू कम्युनिटीज, राइट? सो आबिद वाली बात बिल्कुल, ये आपकी वाली जो बात है ना कि अल्लाह का अजाब है, that is exactly the narrative. But the point that is there is people are not looking at IPCC reports, they're directly looking at something that they understand to be bigger than them, and वो कहने के फौरन बाद मस्जिद जाके वो दुआ भी मांगते. So it's not just a question कि मैं गवर्नमेंट से कहूँ कि जी हर जुम्मे जो है वो खुतबा दे दे पानी पे, उससे भी नहीं चलेगा. I actually have to start looking at religious communities as a stakeholder the same way as I look at my donors, and saying if they are they a lever of change or not. Fatalism wali, I think, is a very serious problem. For years, even when I'm not talking about faith at all, one of the questions that has lingered for 30 years, I'm sure आपको भी आया होगा कि जी हाँ आप कहते तो सही हैं लेकिन देखना ये तो ऐसे ही होना है, अल्लाह ने लिखा है. So that fatalism question is important, and that's where I again come back to behavior or Tahir आपका सवाल. None of this is saying कि जी मुसलमानों ने किया इसलिए वो ये करें, लेकिन तुसी हुन सलाब दे बारे कुछ नहीं करोगे क्योंकि उन्होंने किया, आप बैठे रहेंगे कि जी जब तक हमें अमेरिका पैसा नहीं देगा हम कुछ नहीं करेंगे, राइट? दैट इज वेयर द एडेप्टेशन, वो जो मिडिल वाला था, इज एन अपॉर्चुनिटी. So my perspective on this has been very clear. Push on mitigation to others, do mitigation when it makes sense for yourself, but focus on adaptation, especially when it is development policy, right? There are enough win-wins or low-hanging fruits. अब देखिए ना अगर कराची में दरख्त जो हीट का जो है, दिस इज सीरियस, वी डोंट इवन पुट दिस इन न्यूज़पेपर्स एनीमोर. 250 से 300 बंदा हर साल मरता है. 1-2 साल खबरों में आता था, अब नहीं आता, राइट? आपने, मैं वो अमूमन तस्वीरें लगाता हूँ, यू नो मास ग्रेव्स आपकी कराची में बनती हैं, but because there are these migrants, they are poor, and the answer is mostly shade and hydration. Now let's say कि आपने दरख्त लगाए और पानी अवेलेबल किया और कल पता लगता है climate change was a hoax, Trump is right. It is still a good thing, right? So that is the type of things I think we should be looking at that. Here, the key point to me is behavior. We are not talking policy, we are talking behavior. Cults, you may be right. I think मैं कई बार डरता हूँ कि you know my kids will talk about me as कि तुम colonialist थे और तुमने ये एजेंडा वो किया. That may be so. मैंने एक नीति थी, हाँ मैं आपका क्रिएट नहीं आई हाँ नहीं देयर इज अ वीडियो, आप अगर यूट्यूब पे जाएं, सम कॉन्फ्रेंस सम टाइम बैक, दे यू नो उसके बाद वो कमेंट लेते हैं, मैंने कमेंट दिया है ना, मैं दे आस्क्ड मी अबाउट अ कमेंट आई मेड इन द डिस्कशन, एंड द कमेंट वाज कि इज एनवायरमेंटल रिलीजन, and half jokingly but only half jokingly saying it kind of is, right? हमारा एक कलर है, हमारा एक, हमारी किताबें हैं, हमारे दिन हैं, right? There is a lot of things that we do, and the critics actually, the only major religious community that is anti-environment is evangelists in the US, not evangelists everywhere, right? The global data. Now, Pope se leke sare, they are the only ones. And their argument is exactly this, कि environment is a religion, environment is a cult, तो तुम लोग इसलिए कर रहे हो. So those would be my sort of very, very, very large things. But none of this is saying कि मुसलमानों ने किया है इसलिए वो ये करें. What I'm saying is कि there is a physical reality. हाँ, so there is a physical reality and a lot of, if it can lead to what is good behavior or beneficial behavior, then why shouldn't we use it? That's my only limit. Sorry. तारिक से राज जा रहा.
ये आसान वाले सवाल थे. देखिए जी, I have two major concerns. I mean, first of all, thank you very much. Very provocative. मुझे जरा सोचने दे. And a couple of the things that you said about, you know, earlier practice during the Prophet, peace be upon him, ये मुद और हुमा, I think they were interesting, and I probably want to know more. वो क्या उनकी वो है. But there are two fundamental problems. One is that you actually drew a line. Somebody can call it between theory and practice. You drew a line between this is Islam and this is Muslims, right? And that's a very conventional way of doing it. And I would put it to you, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. There is no such thing as Islam other than Muslims, right? Whatever values we possess are reflected in our behavior. If after 1400 years we haven't learned any behavior, then that is not part of our this thing. And in any case, also one can say, if you look at different religions, except for superficial and irrelevant things, they're all the same, right? मतलब है कि ये कि कत्ल ना करो, झूठ ना बोलो, बेईमानी ना करो, ये सब लोग करते हैं. If you don't mind, I'll tell a story. I was about 16 years old, so I had a question. I asked my father कि तो मैंने कहा कि shall we ask किसी मौलवी से? And my father, I mean, our family is extremely religious, as you know, वो सारे के सारे. But my father, with a twinkle in his eye, said कि उनको कुछ नहीं आता. And then he gave a metaphor which I think was very telling. He said कि देखो, if you go into the army, there's a drill sergeant who is going to teach you how to do the drill. Left, right, कैसे होगा, salute कैसे करो. But when we go into a war, we send the generals, not the drill sergeants. He said, I'm training you to be a general. There's a fight between good and evil. You have to fight that fight. Whether you know how to salute or not is inconsequential, right? Unko drill aati hai. But the real issue is something different, how to behave with people and all. Now, in some sense, this division between the theory of Islam, assuming such a thing exists, and the practice of Islam, I would put it to you, is a completely false dichotomy, right? And that will take me to my second question, but I want to say one more thing in this regard, which might be useful for you. My friend Leila Ahmed, professor at Harvard, her wonderful memoir, A Border Crossing, she gives a very good example. She said that she had grown up in a very religious household. Her grandmother was basically invoking religion all the time, prayed all the time. And she said, I knew what Islam was. And she said, then somebody mentioned this lady who has been writing about these things. And she said, I was curious because I hadn't heard any of that stuff. So I said, maybe she's telling lies. But then I went and did research, and lo and behold, it was true, whatever she was saying. But that was a very different type of Islam, right? And the metaphor that she gives, Adil, this would be very of great interest to you. She says it's like the religion of the Quran, which since it has no vowels, you have to breathe life into those. The words are dead on the page. You have to breathe life into them. And she said, they are talking about a dead religion. I'm talking about a living religion, right? And the fundamental thing is, we always go back to the dead religion, and we forget that the real religion is how you and I and Abid and everybody else behave. This is what Islam. And when you say that we behave like this, then this is what Islam is. So if we have to talk about it, maybe that is the way to start talking about it, rather than to come up with that false dichotomy. Ek to mera masla hai. Second masla, which is related to this, is that our entire experience has been that whenever we have brought religion into something, we did not get that something, but we got some distorted form of dead religion. ठीक है? आपने कहा कि तालीम में religion ले आओ, कोई religion नहीं मिली, लेकिन आपकी तालीम भी आपके हाथ से गई. तो आप जिस चीज में भी आप religion आते हैं, you do it at your own peril, because it is not that you are bringing in religion, you are bringing in and empowering a particular community which is committed to the dead religion that we are talking about, in opposition to the living religion that you and I inhabit. Right? So if you are empowering that community, you're doing so at your own peril, and I would say, okay, don't do that. Now, I just want to make those two points. My concern is that I think ultimately, whether we are talking about religion, but I think you use the appropriate term, and I think the lady here used the appropriate term. We are talking about behavior which is driven by culture. And for want of a better word, our culture is Islamic, right? That is how we behave. But culture doesn't change on its own. It changes through the kind of visible things that we look at, right? We have developed this culture because of a certain situation, right? We throw things in the ground, not because we are inherently bad people, but because of the kind of things that we need in order to do the good stuff. They don't exist, right? And those, and in fact, we briefly mentioned this, those are infrastructure, laws, policing, and technology, right? If you want to bring about a change in behavior, this is where we go back to, rather than to say that I want to go back to some
What was the last one? Law, infrastructure, policing,
and technology.
technology.
ठीक है, मतलब अगर आपने लोगों से बेहतर काम करा, देखे ना, जब आप वेस्ट को सेपरेट करते हैं, तो you have a technology there. You also have laws there. You also have policing there, right? You have the infrastructure there. अगर वो चारों चीजें नहीं होंगी, तो आप क्या करेंगे, right? And basically, since we don't do this, and then we are, lo and behold, we say, okay, this is the way people behave. वो एक मैं कहानी बार बार सुनाता हूँ, एक बंदा था, वो रोजाना लंच के ऊपर आता था, तो वो खोल के देखता, कहता फिर दाल, क्या बकवास है, और गालियां देता था गंदी गंदी। लोगों ने उसे कहा, यार हमें क्यों कहते हो, अपनी बीवी को कहो। उसने कहा, मैं तो शादीशुदा नहीं हूँ। उसने कहा, अच्छा फिर कुक को कहो। कहता, मेरा कुक भी ठीक है। कहता, तुम्हारा खाना कौन बनाता है? कहता, जी मैं खुद ही बनाता। Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. जी डॉक्टर आपको बोल रहा माइक से।
नहीं बहस ज्यादा नहीं होती अभी।
My main question is this. एक तो मैं इस टॉपिक पे बात करना चाहती हूँ कि ये जो आपने कहा कि वुजू में बहुत ज़्यादा पानी यूज़ होता है, और एज अ साइकोलॉजिस्ट मैं ये बात करना चाहूँगी कि ये हमारी जो रिलीजियस रिचुअल्स हैं उसकी प्रैक्टिस में लोग इतना ज़्यादा उस चीज़ को सीरियस लेते हैं, बचपन से सिखाया जाता है कि वो बड़े होकर आदत बन जाती है, और फिर बाद में वो ऑब्सेसिव कंपल्सिव डिसऑर्डर बन जाता है कि हमें लगता है कि जब तक हम बहुत ज़्यादा पानी यूज़ करके वुजू नहीं करेंगे हम साफ़ नहीं होंगे। और दूसरा, हमारे रिलीजन में जो तहारत के नाम पे वो बार बार अपने आप को साफ़ करना एक वो बहुत बड़ा एलिमेंट है। दूसरी चीज़ जो बिहेवियर रिलेटेड है, अभी जो भी डिजास्टर आता है, लोग कुछ अरसे बाद, इतनी कम्युनिटी हमारी मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी और पाकिस्तानी कम्युनिटी बहुत रिजिलियंट है, कुछ अरसे के बाद वो उस चीज़ को जस्टिफाई कर लेते हैं कि अच्छा ठीक है अल्लाह का अज़ाब था या अल्लाह बेहतर करेगा, जस्टिफिकेशन दे के। यही वाली चीज़ें जो वो खुद से ज्यूम करते हैं और रिजिलियंट हो जाते हैं। अगर हम नेशनल लेवल पे हम बात करते हैं कि जी पॉलिसी मेकिंग में ये होना चाहिए, अगर पॉलिसी मेकिंग में ये चीज़ें हों कि हम कोई कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग प्रोग्राम पहले बना लिए जाएं कि वो पहले ही छोटी छोटी चीज़ें अपने प्रैक्टिस में लाना स्टार्ट करें, और ये बाकी चीज़ें क्लाइमेट फाइनेंसिंग ये तो बहुत बड़ी चीज़ें हो जाती हैं, लेकिन इनिशियल लेवल पे ये बहुत ज़रूरी है कि उनका बिहेवियर शेप किया जाए कि वो छोटी छोटी प्रैक्टिस करें और अपने आप को खुद आने वाले डिजास्टर से बचाएं।
थैंक यू सो मच डॉक्टर साहब, वंडरफुल टॉक। मेरे 3 क्वेश्चंस हैं। एक बड़ा सिंपल सा, हैव वी क्रॉस द गैलीलियो वर्सेस पोप डिबेट कि अब हमारे वो रिलीजियस माइंडसेट दे हैव एक्सेप्टेड क्लाइमेट चेंज और वो उस तरह वो चीज़ें। सेकंड इज व्हाट आर योर थॉट्स ऑन कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ ओनरशिप? कैन वी रिलेट ओनरशिप का कॉन्सेप्ट विद फेथ और समथिंग, जो कॉस्ट थ्योरम था कि असाइन प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स टू कॉमन प्रॉपर्टीज और आप उसको सॉल्व कर सकते हैं। एंड थर्ड, थोड़ा सा कंट्रोवर्शियल, मैंने एक वीडियो देखी हुई है सवात में, वो जो होटल डिस्ट्रॉय होता है वो भी बड़ी एक खौफनाक वीडियो है। लेकिन उसके बाद एक और वीडियो भी है यूट्यूब पे जिसमें ओनर उसी होटल को दोबारा बिल्ड करके कह रहा है कि अल्लाह के फजलो करम से हमने दोबारा बिल्ड कर लिया। तो वो चीज़ क्या क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंस और वो जो रिलीजियस से एक चीज़ आ रही है वो किस तरह से रिलेटेड? थैंक यू।
ये लास्ट राउंड है, अगर आपको कोई एक आध क्वेश्चन है तो
थैंक यू सर। आपने सर जो 7 कॉन्सेप्ट्स ऑफ एज ऑफ अडेप्टेशन जिनमें आपने स्टार्ट लिया मीज़ान से, वक्फ, इसराफ, हेमा, खिलाफत, अदल एंड फितरा। अब जब हम अपने इसको अगर एज अ फ्रेमवर्क डेवलप किया जाएगा तो हमें जो है लीडरशिप चाहिए होगी रिलीजियस कम्युनिटी से। अब हम अगर उसमें नेम्स अपने फिंगर टिप्स पे देखना चाहें कि कॉमनली लेस कंट्रोवर्शियल और मोर एग्रीड फिगर्स कौन से हैं, तो हमें इस्लामिक बैंकिंग पे मुफ्ती तकी उस्मानी साहब का नाम तो मिल जाता है। मगर जब हम जो वक्फ, फितरा और खिलाफा और हिमा इसके ऊपर बात करेंगे पॉलिसी साइड पे या गवर्नमेंट साइड पे, इनकी झलक आपको नजर आएगी मुख्तलिफ प्रोजेक्ट्स की सूरत में। बट व्हेन इट कम्स टू ऑनरशिप एंड लीडरशिप फ्रॉम द रिलीजियस कम्युनिटी, उसको सर हम कैसे रिजॉल्व करेंगे? क्योंकि अब हमारे ऐसे पार्लियामेंटेरियंस भी मौजूद हैं जिनमें मौलवी फैज, वो बोलते बहुत कम थे, मगर जब ये क्लीन ग्रीन पाकिस्तान का बिल पास हो रहा था तो ही स्टूड एंड ही एंडोर्स दैट बिल आउट ऑफ ऑपोजिशन बेंचेस। मगर साथ उन्होंने कोट भी की है कि हदीस आप वसल्लम की कि भाई ये जो मुसलमानों को ताकीद कर रहे हैं कि घरों के बाहर कचरा मत फेंको, ये यहूद और नसारा की आदत है। इस तरह वो उन्होंने कोट किया, उसको वैलिडेट किया, और जिसको फौरन जो ट्रेजरी बेंचेस थे उन्होंने उसको पुश किया और कहा जी देखें यहाँ से भी हमें एंडोर्समेंट मिल रही है। तो वो इस तरह के फिगर्स हमें बहुत कम मिलते हैं जो उस तरह से आकर वैलिडेट कर सकें। तो इसको हम कैसे फिगर आउट करेंगे सर?
एनी लास्ट फ्रॉम दिस साइड, जो कर चुके हैं उनको दोबारा मौका नहीं मिलता। जी जी आप।
आई थिंक इट्स अ ह्यूमन नेचर के वो कहा जाता है कि एवरीथिंग विच मेक्स मी हैप्पी इज ईदर इलीगल, एक्सपेंसिव या सिन होता है। तो आपने इंसेंटिवाइजेशन की बात की कि जब तक इंसेंटिवाइजेशन आपकी कल्चरल वैल्यूज में या रिलीजियस में नहीं आएगा तब तक हम उसे अडेप्ट नहीं कर सकेंगे। तो ग्रीन फाइनेंसिंग, आपने कहा इस्लामिक ग्रीन फाइनेंसिंग होनी चाहिए। सो व्हाट डू यू से कि फिर सवाब कमाने वाले नलके आ जाएं और बिजली सवाब कमाने वाली बिजली के बल्ब आ जाएं, इस तरह की कोई चीज़ की क्यों हम बिजली की बचत कर रहे होंगे शायद। तो
मेरा सर सिंपल सा सवाल है एडिंग टू ज़ैनब्स क्वेश्चन। जब डिस्ट्रिक्ट अडेप्टेशन प्लान के उसमें हम जब कंसल्टेशंस कर रहे थे तो जो एक चीज़ मुझे कंफ्यूज कर रही थी, वो जब हम पॉलिसी लेवल पे देखते हैं तो वो आपका एक इम्प्लीमेंटेशन वाला होता है, पॉलिसी मेकिंग करते हैं, और आपका देन एक नीचे कम्युनिटी है। कम्युनिटी का बिलीव आपका जो है ना वो इंडिजिनस नॉलेज पे है। इंडिजिनस नॉलेज को जो आपका साइंटिफिकली जो चीज़ें डेवलप कर रहे हैं वो इसको मिथ में ले रहे हैं। तो अब इसमें मैं ये समझना चाह रही हूँ कि इंडिजिनस नॉलेज, कम्युनिटी और आपकी जो साइंटिफिकली जो रिसर्च करते हैं, जो आपके पॉलिसीज बनाते हैं, एविडेंस बेस्ड पॉलिसीज होती हैं, उनको आपस में कैसे लिंक कर सकते हैं? क्योंकि ये एक बहुत बड़ा जो है एक में गैप जो मुझे नजर आया जब हम कंसल्टेशंस कर रहे थे। तो कम्युनिटी आपकी बिलीव करती है इंडिजिनस नॉलेज पे, लेकिन आपका जो साइंटिफिक डेटा है वो आपका जो है ना उसको पाकिस्तान के अंदर मोस्टली इस चीज को जो है इससे वो कर रहे हैं, डिसएग्री कर रहे हैं।
सर थैंक यू सो मच फॉर योर टाइम एंड फॉर दिस डिस्कशन। तो ये जो डिस्कशन था या जो डिबेट था मुझे बड़ा पसंद है, इंटरेस्टिंग भी था। मैं तो चाहता हूँ कि जो स्मॉल सेक्शन ऑफ पीपल यहाँ हो रहा है, मैं तो चाहता हूँ कि ये देहात में भी हो, मदरसे भी हो, और हम मौलाना के साथ भी ये डिस्कशन जो है कर सके। लेकिन सर इसमें जो एक चीज़ थी जो आपने डेटा दिया वज़ू का, जो पानी ज़ाया होता है, इसके साथ साथ बहुत सारे और जगहों पे भी पानी ज़ाया होता है। अगर वो भी ऐड होता है इस प्रेजेंटेशन में, जो रेडिकल लोग होते हैं उनको ये मौका ना मिलता कि वो इस चीज़ को पकड़ते और इस चीज़ पे लोगों को गुमराह करते। थैंक यू।
आदिल, मेरा ख्याल है कि काफी सारे हाथ हैं, लेकिन इट्स अप टू यू।
अच्छा नहीं वो लगता है वो मुझे मारेंगे अगर नहीं पूछने
थैंक यू सो मच जी। थैंक यू सो मच सर। मेरा जो क्वेश्चन है वो बिहेवियरल चेंज के ऊपर है कि हम रिलीजियस बुक्स में हम पढ़ते हैं, हमें एविडेंस भी मिलते हैं कि जब भी लोग कोई यानी कि एक्सट्रीम बैड डीड्स की तरफ जाते थे तो उनके ऊपर जो एक्सट्रीम वेदर इवेंट्स हमें जो है वो देखने को मिलते थे। लेट्स सपोज उनके ऊपर बहुत सारी बारिश थी आती थी, इस तरह की जो ना एक्सट्रीम वेदर था, लेकिन आज के दौर के अंदर अगर हमें कोई भी ऐसा एक्सट्रीम वेदर देखने को मिलता है तो हम उसको जो लिंक करते हैं वो क्लाइमेट चेंज के साथ लिंक करते हैं। लेट्स सपोज इस्लामाबाद के अंदर एक हेल स्टॉर्म आता है, हम उसको जो है वो क्लाइमेट चेंज के साथ जो है लिंक करने की कोशिश करते हैं। तो मेरा ये क्वेश्चन है कि हमें बिहेवियरल चेंज के हवाले से क्या रिलीजन और इसकी जो एक्चुअल रियलिटी है इसके दरमियान कोई लाइन ड्रॉ करने की ज़रूरत है, या हम किस तरह से जो रिलीजियस बिलीव्स हैं, जो रिलीजियस बिहेवियर है, उसको डिफरेंशिएट कर सकते हैं एक्चुअल या साइंटिफिक बिहेवियर से। सर ये मेरा क्वेश्चन है इसके ऊपर। थैंक यू सो मच।
माजरत बाकी तमाम अहबाब से जो कि क्वेश्चन करना चाह रहे हैं। आई नो आदिल हैज़ अ टाइट स्केड्यूल। हम कोशिश करेंगे इस फॉर्मली ख़त्म करने के बाद अगर आपको गपशप का मौका मिले या आप इनको ईमेल कर सकें, अपने कमेंट्स भिजवा सकें। बट आदिल, आई थिंक यू हैव एनफ फूड फॉर थॉट। ओवर टू यू।
More than enough. And thank you for that. I really mean it. I thank you for this. As I had said, ये it's work in progress. इस तरह नहीं कि खत्म नहीं हुआ. I'm still struggling myself and others who are working on it कि इसको किस तरह समझना है या नहीं समझना है, या करना है या नहीं करना. But most importantly, how to convey it, which remains a major challenge, including in today, which is not to say कि आपको मेरी बात नहीं समझ आई, which is to say कि मुझे अभी तक अपनी बात करनी नहीं आई. I say that honestly. क्योंकि religion is such an emotive issue. क्योंकि religion, particularly in Pakistan, especially जो तारिक का second point था, I think that's the most difficult one for me. क्योंकि and it's not just in Pakistan, ये तो US में भी यही है अभी कि there is a very real, this is a very major constituency, or it is a very powerful constituency. तो वो अगर हाथ से जब निकलता है तो फिर पता नहीं क्या होता. So all of those are correct. I just remind you कि मैंने बिल्कुल शुरू में जो बात की थी कि ये मुश्किल टॉपिक है. मुश्किल टॉपिक है, partly because we are not there, partly because टॉपिक ही मुश्किल है, motive. I still think it is worth, that is why it is worth studying कि इसमें से कौन सी वो चीज है जो निकल सकती है या नहीं निकल सकती. I would suggest कि जहां आप लोग बहुत सारे सवाल gravitate करते हैं, and I've done this a few times now, it always happens, doesn't have to be Pakistanis, are actually not the place I would like them to gravitate to. तो एक तो इमीडिएट हमारा फ्रेमवर्क कॉप का या पॉलिसी का या एड का आ जाता है. आई डोंट थिंक इसमें उसकी कोई इतनी ज्यादा वो है. That is why again it goes to mitigation, not to mitigation but to adaptation, to local stuff and so on and so forth. तो एक चीज तो ये थी. मैं सारों पे नहीं जाऊंगा, but just the few things that I had noted. यार आपने मजाक में लोटा कहा था, but I was going to link it to Tariq's fourth thing. Lota as a technology actually was the difference between पहले और अब. हाँ, असली जो टेक्नोलॉजी आई वो टैप की है. So you find these engineering papers on types of taps in wuzu, जिस पे वो बैठ के एक्सपेरिमेंट कर रहे हैं. मैं भी when I was last at Oxford, तो वो at the Oxford Center there was a mosque, तो मैं वो टाइमर लेके जो है दो को बिठाया हुआ था कि वो डिफरेंट जो टैप्स थे. But the actual difference is actually the lota. It's not अच्छाई बुराई. जब आप वुजू एक इंस्ट्रूमेंट में लेते हैं ना, इसलिए मैंने वो सारी बोतलें रखी थी. इतना पानी ले जाना हो ना तो आप वैसे ही कहेंगे यार छोटा लो, and you will do it. Then a convenience came. Now another technology can come, and there are some very fine ones when just sensor wali hai, timer wali hai, and so on and so forth. But that's not a frivolous comment at all. But a limited amount, and then you say कि अच्छा मैंने इससे ये करना, as opposed to a technology saying कि आपके पास unlimited है until you have finished. And this is a technologically solvable problem, not that that problem alone will solve everything. So एक तो ये था. दूसरा, please, on bunch of these questions, I would again caution myself कि remember मेरी proposition में the word used is values. Title में वो आते वो faith हो गया. This is the challenge I'm struggling with. Example पे आते वो religion हो गया. And that's also a very slippery slope for the reasons that Tariq mentioned. Right? What is in the lived experience is the values as we interpret them, and what is in the formal dead, जिसको आप कह रहे हैं, is the dictate that was in religion. And I'll come to yours in the end, but I just wanted to highlight that. To me, जो आपका सवाल था पहले वाला, या जो आपका था, या जो आपका था adaptation के, आप सारे मेरे ख्याल में उसी प्रोजेक्ट पे काम कर रहे हैं. तो आप अपना प्रोजेक्ट सॉल्व करना चाह रहे हैं इधर, जिसमें मैं कोई हेल्प नहीं कर सकता, लेकिन एम आई राइट? अच्छा, but my point again remains, this will not give you policy, but if this gives you this meaning, talking about values and faith and actual practice, on which I totally agree, a better way to talk to communities, then I think it's an advance. Right? This is a serious point I do want to make. कि मसला ये नहीं है कि आपने गवर्नमेंट को क्या समझाना है, मसला पहला तो ये ना कि आपने एक कम्युनिटी का कॉन्फिडेंस लेना है एंड उसमें उसकी जुबान बोलनी है. I would argue, not against, but to building on Tariq's point, कि in our vernacular language, because religion is culture, laws, infrastructure, policing, and sometimes technology, में जब तक लोटा नहीं आया था मुझे नहीं पता था, actually do derive from our practice of religion. Right? And if this language gives you an ability to talk to communities not as outsiders trying to impose something, but as building on their actual lived experience and practice, then I think इसमें कोई use है. उससे ज़्यादा policy change करने वाले पे तो I also don't, but that's the point. यार Galileo versus Pope, I do not know, but the last Pope and seemingly this Pope तो ठीक है, वो तो मान गया. बाकियों का मुझे पता नहीं, but actually the interesting thing is, especially since Laudato Si, which was the last Pope's encyclical, there has been this sort of onslaught from every religion कि उन्होंने कहा तो हम भी कहते हैं, right? और वो थोड़ा सा वो performative है, लेकिन इस वक्त, as I said, the study suggests कि apart from evangelicals in the US, every major religion is trying to say कि जी हम बड़े green हैं, right? Again, उस पे मुझे उस पे एतराज करने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है. Propertyship वाला आपका question is more difficult, and again, I do not have the ability, at least from a religious perspective, to do that. उसके लिए ज्यादा इल्म चाहिए होगा. होटल वाली कहानी पता नहीं आपने मुझसे पहले सुनी है नहीं, but मेरी favorite कहानी है. This is Hotel Honeymoon. होटल हनीमून की कहानी, एंड यूजुअली आई पुट माय वीडियो अप देयर ऑफ द, आप सबने होटल हनीमून देखा है. पिछले स्लाब में वो फ्लड आया स्वात में, और फिर CNN ने चला दिया, फिर सारी दुनिया ने देखा, और उसमें पीछे चीखें भी थी. एंड एज यू नो, होटल हनीमून की कहानी ये है कि वो बना था 2007 में. इट ब्रोक एवरी रूल ऑफ लोकल कंस्ट्रक्शन दैट इट कुड. उसको नोटिस भी गए, उसने फिर भी बनाया, लेकिन क्योंकि आप जाके वहां इंस्टाग्राम की तस्वीरें लेते हैं, अपने पैर डालते हैं पानी में और कढ़ाई खाते हैं. इट देन द 2010 केम, जिसके बाद जो आप कह रहे थे, उसने आया कि हम बड़े रिजिलियंट कौम है, हम किसी फ्लड पे वो सरेंडर नहीं करेंगे, वी आर गोइंग टू रीमेक इट. चंदा लेके फिर से बनाया. उसके बाद अगला फ्लड आया, उसके बाद वो फिर गया. उस फ्लड के 6 महीने बाद, 7 महीने बाद, आई वाज इन पाकिस्तान, तो आई आस्क्ड माय कॉलीग हमाद, हमारा क्योंकि वहां दफ्तर है, कि जरा पता करो कि इस होटल का क्या हुआ. And what I was told was it was already beginning to be rebuilt, and now it is rebuilt. Right? So ultimately, वो उसमें अल्लाह का ताल्लुक आई थिंक कोई नहीं है. उसमें कमिश्नर साहब का ताल्लुक है, जिसकी वो बात नहीं समझ रहा था, because there were local government who was trying to, and this goes to this question of implementation and local things. जो सॉरी आपका सवाल था, उसमें I do have a serious point to make. I think वो जो 7 elements of adaptation है, वो राइट साइड उर्दू वाले लफ्ज, अरबी वाले लफ्ज नहीं है, वो अंग्रेजी वाले लफ्ज. तो 7 things I will stand by, क्योंकि वो लिटरेचर से आई हैं. These जो उर्दू वाले जो है वक्फ और हिमा और निज़ाम, these are examples that I put into it. It will be false and wrong to say कि जी इस्लाम में पूरा फ्रेमवर्क पड़ा है, ऐसा नहीं है. What I've done is just choose and pick ideas that speak that language. To me, the ultimate goal is can we make this our issue? And I'll come with that to sort of Tariq's point, which I actually agree with. कि वो जो to me the challenge ये है कि इसको हम अपना issue कैसे बनाएंगे, right? And I think one necessary step is that we have to have a local Pakistani way to talk about this. And because the Pakistani culture is, for good or bad, जैसे भी आप उसकी वो ideology हो, so rooted in these things, if that can be a benefit, that is the sort of very small, simple kernel of things that I'm talking. Tariq, without going into too much, because your points are both right and deep, जो आपका second वाला है ना, that's the one that's really the disturbing one. Especially वो जो मैं slippery slope कह रहा हूँ कि मैं value से शुरू हुआ, faith पे पहुंच गया, और आखिर में बात सारी मैंने की रिलीजन पे. And because of that lived experience, not just in Pakistan, but in a whole bunch of places, what else will come with it? So that I do not have an answer for, except as you have just seen me do. I keep trying to say that iska scope is much less than you want it to be. So don't solve every problem with this. This is a small thing. Jo pehla wala hai, I don't think you're right. There's that line. I am hoping that I am on the same side of the line as yourself. That there is a lived experience, and maybe I need to tell the story better. कि जब मैं कहता हूँ ना कि हमारा वो जो word है, our actions don't match that. In a way, I can now see कि it sounds as if मैं कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि वहाँ वापस आ जाए. लेकिन वो जो action है वो कहीं से आया है ना. It has evolved, and my hope is that it can continue to evolve through some of these things, which is not to say कि वापस चले जाओ आप मुझ पे, but this idea that the idea of asraf and sort of waste could be, I don't know, I don't know, but I think it's worth exploring, and I think it's worth expanding, especially because you can link both the science, not all three, science, economics, and there's a cost to waste. There is a science of not wasting, and then if you can make that the value, that might. And as I said, मैंने वो पहले बात की है, laws, infrastructure, policing, technology का मुझे नहीं पता, but the first three are heavily dominated by a faith-based expression, right? So can we use that to leverage कोई छोटी मोटी? Leila Ahmed, actually, I think मैंने पहला उनका आपसे ही सुना था, but I'm also a big fan of hers, and including this idea that she has about women's Islam versus men's Islam, right? कि इस्लाम फर्क नहीं है.
And it's the same distinction.
हाँ,
It's the same
हाँ,
between them.
हाँ, कि इस्लाम फर्क नहीं है, लेकिन मर्द ने जो ना जुम्मे के जुम्मे करना है, औरत ने बच्चे को उसको प्रैक्टिकली करना है, उसको वजू सिखाना है, उसको खाने इस हाथ से उस हाथ से करना है. So it becomes an actual practice as opposed to कि मैं सिर्फ जाके जो ना आलमी मसाइल हल करूं on the real thing. So to me, I might not have expressed it that way, but to me it is sort of that lived experience. But also not the only thing I'll push back is I'm not convinced that we lived. Actually, I think we agree that lived experience is also not frozen, right? That lived experience जब टूटी आई तो change हो, हाँ?
We know how to change it. And
वो institution ठीक. That we can push on different sides of and move. Lekin I again sort of as I said, to me this is just an interesting area of exploration. I do think this values question is going to keep coming at us because science and economics, I don't think they have failed, but they have shown their limits. And we may even have more. So I'm really, really grateful to everyone for the time and the ideas.
Thank you very much, Adil, for this very interesting discussion. और जैसा कि आपने देखा, बहुत से दोस्तों के क्वेश्चंस हम नहीं ले पाए. All I want to say कि अगर आप इसको पाकिस्तान में इस पे कुछ भी डाटा या कुछ स्टडी करवाना चाहें तो माशाल्लाह our climate change, ecology, energy teams, they are माशाल्लाह very active youngsters. और आपने उनको कुछ सवालों से भी अंदाज़ा लगा लिया होगा. तो अगर आपको किसी किस्म का कोई यहाँ पे एम्पिरिकल रिसर्च में सपोर्ट चाहिए तो दिस टीम वुड बी मोर देन हैप्पी टू डू इट. बिफोर आई कंक्लूड, मैं तारिक से चाह रहा हूँ कि कल के अपने इवेंट का यहाँ पे अनाउंसमेंट कर दें ताकि अगर कोई लोग वहाँ भी पहुँचना चाहें तो उनको पता हो कि वो क्या है और कब हो रहा है.
जी कल ये हम 3 दोबारा बोल रहे हैं प्लस couple of other fillers. This Shafkat is he here?
He's not here.
और एक काकखेल साहब हैं, मोमी हैं, और वो है नासिर, the वाइस चांसलर वाला माइकवाल. It's on sustainable urbanism, greening cities. आपको पता है जैसे हमारे शहर तो बिल्कुल ही बुरी हालत में है. वेस्ट जो है हर तरफ फैला हुआ है, कोई सही तौर से वो नहीं होता. ट्रांसपोर्ट की बुरी हालत है, एनर्जी कंजर्वेशन भी सही तौर से नहीं हो रही. ग्रीनिंग जो है वो दरख्त ऐसे काट रहे हैं So ultimately, the question really is, how do we, as citizens, do something about it? So we have invited Adil to give a keynote speech. आबिद से मैंने रिक्वेस्ट की है कि वो एक तो अपना सपोर्ट हमें वो कर दें, और सेकेंडली थोड़ा सा SDGs के बारे में बता दें. और इसी तरह अपना वाइस चांसलर से मैंने रिक्वेस्ट की है कि वो हमें ज़रा बताए कि तालीम के और ये सस्टेनेबल अर्बनिज्म में ये एजुकेशन सिस्टम में कैसे इंटरफेसेस हो सकते हैं, हम कैसे उनको इन्फ्लुएंस करेंगे. बट अल्टीमेटली व्हाट वी वांट टू डू इज के लोग उसमें इनपुट प्रोवाइड करेंगे, जी हम ये करेंगे. एंड सेकेंडली वी ऑल्सो वांट टू बिल्ड ग्रीनिंग आवर सिटीज. तो उसमें आपसे दरख्वास्त है कि आप तशरीफ लाएं. 1:30 बजे से लेके 4 बजे तक है अल्लामा इकबाल ओपन यूनिवर्सिटी में. आप जाएंगे तो पूछ लेंगे, वो मैं आपके पास है वो उसकी अनाउंसमेंट, तो वो जरा शेयर. एक्सीलेंट. तो मेरे आने की जरूरत ही नहीं थी. थैंक यू आबिद.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As I said, this is an annual ritual जो कि we're trying to make it a living ritual, and we are looking forward आदिल अगर 2026 में पहले नहीं तो एटलीस्ट एंड पे हम आपसे प्रोग्रेस लेंगे. सारी जो आपने हमारा ये हमें भाषण सुनाया और आपने हमारा इनपुट लिया, तो हम चाहेंगे कि आप अगले साल दिसंबर में आके इस पे रिपोर्ट दें कि क्या हुआ. सो टी इज रेडी. थैंक यू वेरी मच ऑल ऑफ यू फॉर joining us.